Good morning, Colonel. The judge's voice cut through the courtroom, and everything just stopped. Not the clerk, not the lawyers, not my daughter, and definitely not my mother-in-law, who had been smiling like she already owned the entire room. The second the judge said Colonel, her face lost every bit of its color. I kept my hands folded in my lap. 3 months earlier, I'd been standing in my kitchen making chicken soup when a certified letter arrived. Ever since my husband passed away, his family had turned every single conversation into a fight dressed up as concern. My mother-in-law criticized the funeral flowers, said I'd sold his boat too quickly, called me emotional, like it was an insult. Now she was petitioning the court, claiming I had manipulated my husband into leaving me our lake house. That little cedar cabin had been our refuge for 32 summers. During his illness, it was the one place he could still really breathe. He'd sit out on the dock, wrapped in a navy blanket, while I read beside him, just listening to the water. My daughter found me sitting at the kitchen table and told me to just settle. "Grandma has money and lawyers," she said. I looked up at her. I'm his family too. My husband and I had made a quiet agreement years earlier to keep my military career mostly private after I retired. I wanted a life that didn't demand anything more of me. No more blood, no more sacrifice, just quiet. A week later, my mother-in-law invited the whole family to Sunday dinner. Her riverfront house glittered with chandeliers and polished silver. She sat at the head of the table like royalty, while her son barely looked in my direction. "Legal matters can get so expensive," she said, sipping her wine. "You must be feeling overwhelmed." "I'm managing." "You really should have accepted our offer," her son muttered. "Dad always meant for that property to stay in the family." I looked at him steadily. He made his wishes very clear. She dabbed at her mouth with her napkin. "That's what your lawyers claim." "My lawyers?" I asked. "I don't have any." She smiled, that same cold smile. "You always did think you were smarter than the rest of us, but in the end, you were just a wife." I set my fork down carefully. "I'll see you in court then." She laughed, soft and confident. "You're finished." That night, I opened an old leather case I kept tucked away in my closet. Inside were my commission papers, my military service records, and a silver eagle insignia I hadn't touched in years. I held it in my hands and remembered, for the first time in a long time, exactly who I used to be before grief made me feel small. The morning of the hearing, I put on gray slacks and a navy blouse, tied my silver hair back, and met my daughter outside the courthouse. She handed me a coffee, wearing the worried expression of a daughter watching her mother walk straight into a storm. "Mom, last chance, just settle." I looked at her. "Your father hated bullies." Inside, my mother-in-law stood near security in a cream suit, pearls catching the light at her throat, 3 attorneys hovering around her. When she spotted me, that cold smile came right back. "Margaret actually came," she said to no one in particular. One of her lawyers glanced at me, then at the empty space beside me where a legal team should have been standing. There was no one there. I sat down, completely alone. At 9 o'clock sharp, the judge walked in, looked directly at me and said, "Good morning, Colonel." The entire courtroom went dead silent. My mother-in-law's smile disappeared completely. The judge opened the case file. Retired Colonel Evelyn Shaw served in the Judge Advocate General's Corps for more than 20 years. Her attorney cleared his throat. "We were unaware of that." "That," the judge said dryly, "would be an understatement." I answered every question calmly, while her side tried to paint me as some fragile, dependent widow who had isolated my husband during his illness. So I started asking questions of my own. Had they interviewed the hospice nurses? Reviewed the visitation logs? Spoken to his oncologist directly? Every answer was no. Then I submitted my final piece of evidence, a signed estate letter my husband had written 8 months before he died. In it, he stated clearly that the lake house belonged to me alone, that any future challenge to that would go directly against his wishes, and that he was writing it freely, with no pressure from anyone. My mother-in-law went pale. "That's impossible." "No," I said quietly. "It's just inconvenient." During the recess, my daughter leaned in and whispered, "You were really a colonel?" "Retired." "You prosecuted military crimes?" "For 20 years. When court resumed, I introduced my final piece of evidence, recorded phone calls my mother-in-law had made while my husband was dying. Her voice crackled through the courtroom speakers. "If Margaret loved you, she'd give the house back." "You're sick, Daniel. You're not thinking clearly." Then his voice, weak and exhausted. "Mom, stop." By the end of that week, the judge ruled entirely in my favor. The petition was denied. The lake house stayed mine. Outside the courthouse, my daughter hugged me so hard I nearly lost my balance. Weeks later, I ran into my mother-in-law at a small diner. She looked smaller somehow, without her pearls. She told me she'd been angry, that trying to control everything had felt safer than sitting with her own grief. "I loved him too," I told her. Tears filled her eyes, and for the first time, I didn't see a villain sitting across from me. I saw a frightened mother who had turned her fear into cruelty because she didn't know what else to do with it. Winter settled quietly over the lake house that year. I fixed the loose rail on the dock, painted the shutters, let the silence return. The good kind this time. Alone on the porch one night, I watched moonlight spread slowly across the water and felt something I hadn't expected to feel. Not victory. Peace.